extreme heat killing coral and stressing the world's oceans. This year's extreme heat is putting the world's coral reefs under such severe stress that scientists fear widespread die-offs, endangering not only the richest ecosystems in the ocean, but also fisheries that feed millions and millions of people. From Thailand to Texas, corals are reacting to the heat stress by bleaching, are shedding their color and going into survival mode. Many have already died, and many more are expected to do so in the coming months. Computer forecasts of water temperature suggest that corals in the Caribbean may undergo drastic bleaching in the next few weeks. What is unfolding this year is only the second known global bleaching of coral reefs. Scientists are holding out hope somehow that this year will not be as bad overall as 1998, the hottest year in the historical record, when an estimated 16% of the world's shallow water reefs died. But in some places, the situation is looking worse than in 1998. Scientists say the trouble with the reefs is linked to climate change. For years, they have warned that corals, highly sensitive to excess heat, would serve as an early indicator of the ecological distress on the planet caused by the buildup of greenhouse gases. I am significantly depressed by the whole situation, said Clive Wilkinson, director of the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, an organization in Australia that is tracking this year's disaster. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the first 8 months of 2010 matched 1998 as the hottest January to August period on record. In other words, the planet is heating up rapidly. High ocean temperatures are taxing the organisms most sensitive to them, the shallow water corals that create some of the world's most vibrant and colorful seascapes. Coral reefs occupy a tiny fraction of the ocean, but they harbor perhaps a quarter of all marine species, including a profusion of fish, often called the rainforests of the sea. They are the foundation not only of important fishing industries, but also of tourist economies worth billions and billions of dollars. So, drastic die-offs of coral were seen for the first time in 1983 in the eastern Pacific and the Caribbean during a large-scale weather event known as El Niño. During an El Niño, warm waters normally confined to the western Pacific flow to the east. 2010 is also an El Niño year. Serious regional bleaching has occurred intermittently since the 1983 disaster. It is clear that natural weather variability plays a role in overheating the reefs, but scientists say it cannot, by itself, explain what has now become a recurring phenomenon. It is a lot easier for oceans to heat up above the coral's thresholds for bleaching when climate change is warming the baseline temperatures, said Mark Eakin, who runs a program called Coral Reef Watch for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. If you get an event like El Niño, or you just get a hot summer, it's going to be on top of the warmest temperatures we've ever seen. Coral reefs are made up of millions of tiny animals called polyps that form symbiotic relationships with algae. The polyps essentially act as farmers, supplying the algae with nutrients and a place to live. The algae in turn capture sunlight and carbon dioxide to make sugars that feed the coral polyps. The captive algae give reefs their brilliant colors. Many reef fish sport fantastical colors and patterns themselves, as though dressing to match their surroundings. Coral bleaching occurs when high heat and bright sunshine cause the metabolism of the algae to speed out of control, and they start creating toxins. The polyps essentially recoil, and then the algae are spat out. The corals look white afterward, as though they have been bleached. If temperatures drop, the coral's few remaining algae can reproduce and help the polyps recover. But corals are vulnerable to disease in their denuded condition, and if the heat stress continues, the corals starve to death. Even on dead reefs, new coral polyps will often take hold, though the overall ecology of the reef may be permanently altered. The worst-case scenario is that a reef dies and never recovers. In dozens of small island nations and on some coasts of Indonesia and the Philippines, many people rely heavily on reef fish for food. So, when corals die, the fish are not immediately doomed, but if the coral polyps do not recover, the reef can eventually collapse, scientists say, leaving the fishery far less productive. Research shows that is already happening in parts of the Caribbean, though people there are not as dependent on fishing as those living on Pacific islands. It will be some months before this year's toll is known for sure, but scientists tracking the fate of corals say they have already seen widespread bleaching in Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific, with corals in Thailand, parts of Indonesia, and some smaller island nations being hit especially hard earlier this year. The concern we have now is that the bleaching is so widespread that potential source reefs upstream have been affected. Even in a hot year, of course, climate varies considerably from place to place. The water temperatures in the Florida Keys are only slightly above normal this year, and the beloved reefs of that region have so far escaped serious harm. Parts of the northern Caribbean, including the United States Virgin Islands, saw incipient bleaching this summer, but the tropical storms and hurricanes moving through the Atlantic have cooled the water there and may have saved some corals for now. Further south, though, temperatures are still remarkably high, putting many Caribbean reefs at risk. Summer is only just beginning in the southern hemisphere, but water temperatures off Australia are also above normal, and some scientists are worried about the single most impressive reef on Earth. The best hope now is for mild tropical storms that would help to hopefully cool Australian waters. But if we get a poor monsoon season, I think we could be in for serious bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. And yes, climate change, global warming, whatever have you call it, is very real. It's happening right now. And again, so far, this year has been one of the warmest, if not the warmest, on record in recorded history. So, yes, in other words, the planet is heating up. Again, these are more signs of the end times. Transition days. Revelation, chapter 8, verse 6. And the seven angels, which had the seven trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. 7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire, mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. 8. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became as blood. 9. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. 11. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many humans died of the waters, because they were made bitter. 12. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. 13. And I beheld, and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels, which are yet to sound. And yes, there are many signs happening day by day all around the world.